Hi OpenXML developers. Today I am going to discuss chart markup, and I'm also going to discuss how you can update chart data in an OpenXML word processing ML document or in a presentation ML presentation. Once you understand a bit about the markup, this is actually really easy to do. Before we dive into this whole topic, let me show you real quickly what I mean by this. Here I've got a blank word processing document. I'll insert a chart. Let's see. I'll insert one of these 100% stacked cones. And of course, it brings up the embedded workbook that contains the data for that. Well, let's close that. We don't really need to update the data. We're going to update this data programmatically, so it doesn't matter. We can just take the default data that Word puts in there, and we're going to make our chart look as we want it to. First thing I am going to do is come over here and let's see what we can do to change the layout. I like that layout. Let's change the styling just for fun. Let's change the styling to that. I'm just showing you that we can format this chart any way that we want to. I'm going to do something else here, which is I'm going to select the chart. I'm going to go to the Developer tab and surround the chart with a rich text content control, and I'm going to put in the tag and title of chart 1. And the reason I'm doing this is how the sample code knows how to find the chart to update. So there we have inserted a chart, some random formatting, some random chart. We should do a couple of things. Let's give an axis title here of vehicles. And let's give an axis title here of volume. This will make sense once you see the data that I'm going to update this chart with. So I'll save this and close the Word document. And here, this is the code that's in the sample program. It has a set of series called car, truck, and van, and it has a set of categories called Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, and it has some values in there. In other words, there's 3 series, and there are 4 values, 1 for each category. And let's run this program. It also updated some other charts and some other examples. I'll talk about that in just a bit. But now let's look at that updated chart. And here we can see what we wanted to see. We can see the different series, van, car, and truck over here. And we can see our completely customized graph. And we can see that this chart is updated with the data that I specified in the example program. Well, let's see how we go about doing this. The example code that I'm going to present today enables you to update just about any type of chart with just about any type of data, and it makes it really easy to do this. So now that we've seen what's possible, let's take a quick look at all of the markup and see how we went about this in the example program. I'm going to open this chart01.docx, and I'm going to open it in the Open XML Package Editor Power Tool for Visual Studio 2010. I'm going to open up the main document part, format the XML, and here's that content control that I inserted. And down here we can find this chart element down here, and it has a resource ID of RID5. If I look at this relationship to charts/chart1.xml, we can see, in fact, it does have the relationship of RID5. Now let's look at the actual chart we can see that it has a relationship to embeddings / Microsoft Excel worksheet 1.xlsx. And if I were to look down here in this embeddings folder, I can see this XLSX. I could actually export this XLSX right here. And once I exported it, I could open that XLSX in Excel. It's just a plain old ordinary XLSX, except that it's embedded in the middle of this word processing document just for the purposes of containing the data, the editable data for that chart. Let's look at chart1.xml. I'll format that XML. We can see that the root element here is this chart space element. It's just the root element for the chart part. Down here we can find the chart element, and this contains the markup for the chart itself. And if we drop down further, we can see this plot area, and this is the markup for the drawing of the chart within the region of the chart part. So for instance, up here we could control the floor, sidewall, back wall, and etc. We put in the actual markup for the chart itself in this plot area. I'm going to scroll here a bit so that we can see this bar 3D chart element. Within plot area, there are a whole variety of types of charts. Let's look inside the OpenXML standard a bit, and we can get an overview of the markup that can go inside of this plot area. In the OpenXML standard, there are two sections that are of particular interest to us. There is this DrawingML framework reference material and DrawingML components reference material. This DrawingML framework reference material, this contains, for instance, the markup that we saw in the main document part that contained the chart. So we'll find the definition of those elements that enable us to embed a chart in a word processing document. In section 21, we find 4 sections. First is this main DrawingML section. This contains the documentation about the common DrawingML elements that you'll use throughout DrawingML. We're not that concerned with that today. What we're concerned with is this section 21.2 DrawingML charts. Just to establish context, section 21.3 is chart drawings, and this is the markup that enables you to put drawings on top of a chart. You can go into a chart in word processing ML and you can put other shapes on top of that chart, and that's the use of this chart drawings section markup. And also there are these diagrams. These are the smart art diagrams, for instance. So we're really today interested only in 21.2 DrawingML charts. Let's go look at that plot area element. And what you'll find is within its child elements are all of the various types of charts that you want to create in a word processing document. So for instance, you'll find the bar chart, the area chart. Dropping down, we can find the line chart, the pie chart, and so on. That chart that we just created was a bar 3D chart. So let's go look at bar 3D chart. And what you'll find is for each one of these types of charts, the child elements are pretty similar. So for instance, this is the bar 3D chart. Let's look at the bar chart and compare it. This is the bar 3D chart, and this is the bar chart. And the only thing that we'll find are various things like the bar 3D chart has gap depth and gap width, whereas the bar chart only has gap width. You'll find this is true. Each one of the definitions of each one of these types of charts has certain elements that are particular to that type of chart, and yet they all have a number of elements in common. This only makes sense. There's a lot that is the same between all of the various types of charts, but different varieties of charts will need their own specification of particular aspects of that chart so that Word can draw it properly. One of the things that you'll see is that all of these varieties of charts all have this series element, this SER element. We can see that both the bar 3D chart and the bar chart use the same definition of series. And if I were to look at the series for an area chart, we'll find that it has a lot in common also with what is defined for the bar chart. But there are going to be differences. Some of the types of series enable you to specify particular shapes or drawings for each point or what have you. There are a lot of options that are specific to a particular type of chart, but they all have 5 things in common. Those 5 things in common is they all have category axis data, this right here. They all have values, we can see this right here. They all have an IDX, and they all have an order, and they all have this series text. So the idea here is that we can put together a chart, give it whatever appearance, whatever formatting that we want to give it, and if we can go in and just update this series for that particular chart, then the chart will automatically look the way it's supposed to look when we're all done. It will have the new data that we've inserted into the chart. Before we get into how to do that, there are 2 ways that charts can be specified in Word Processing ML and in Presentation ML. These 2 ways are, first you can, as we saw, have the data be linked to an internal workbook and worksheet. The other way that we can specify a chart is we can specify a chart where it's not linked to an internal workbook and worksheet for its data. Let me show you what I mean by that. Here I'm going to create a new word processing document. I'll call this test.docx. I'll open it, and I'm going to insert a chart. I'm going to insert just the simplest bar chart that I can insert. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the region here. I'm just going to reduce it to 2 series and 2 categories. Because I've reduced it to that, I can delete that data. I can delete that data. So I'll close this, and here we can see our very simple bar chart that has 2 series and 2 categories. I'll save it and close it. And now I'm going to open up this word processing document in the OpenXML package editor. I don't need to touch the main document part. I only want to change this chart1.xml. So I'm going to edit this. First thing I'm going to go do is go down to the bottom, and there's this external data element, and this specifies the relationship ID to the embedded workbook that I had showed you previously. So I'm going to delete that. We're going to effectively say that there is no relationship. The next thing that I'm going to do is right down here I have this TX with a string reference. Well, let's just simplify this by quite a bit. I'm going to take all of that out and take all of that out and just leave us with a V element underneath that TX element. Let me undo it for a second here, and I'll show you what it contained before I did that. Is it contained this formula, and this formula is a reference to the location in that workbook In other words, it's in sheet 1 and it has the location $B $1. Well, we don't need that reference. What we just want is the straight value. So that's what we want. And here for the category, again, it contains a reference to sheet 1 and a range. Instead of having that, I'm going to change this to a string literal. I'll delete those two values and delete the string cache. And now I'll change this to string literal. So in other words, now we have a string literal that has 2 points and it has just the values category 1 and category 2. I'm going to do the exact same operation to this number reference. Instead of making it numRef, I'll make it a numLit. And I'll delete the formula and I'll delete that numCache element. And down here I'll delete that numCache and change this numRef to a numLit. Same thing with this tx, delete that and delete that. And same thing with this string ref, change it to a lit, delete those, delete that, and change that to a string lit. And we have one more place to do this. This number ref needs to be changed to a numLit. And we're done. Now I can save everything in that document. And if I go open up test.docx, I see the exact same chart that I had before, but the difference is this time the data doesn't refer to that workbook. And further, if I right click, there's the edit data. Well, if I click on edit data, it doesn't do anything. Obviously, it can't go do anything. I've actually removed those references to that workbook. In fact, I can even go one better, and over here I can shut this down, and further I can go into embeddings and I can even delete that node. And when I delete that node, I can also go in here and delete the relationship to that node. So now we have that test.docx. It has chart1. It doesn't have any reference to an embedded workbook, and in fact the workbook is no longer embedded in the word processing document, and I can still go open up that word processing document and see my chart. So why is this important? The reason this is important is that if you are programmatically generating charts, you probably, not always, but you probably are not really interested in having your end users go edit that data. This is data that is generated from some underlying database, and in fact you actually may have a vested interest in not enabling them to edit that data. If you generated that data from a database, you don't want them to go and change that data so it doesn't reflect what's in the database. Now, there are scenarios where you might want to enable them to update that data, and this would mean we would also want to go in and update that workbook. That's a different story. That's a different screencast. We'll talk about that later. But one key point about this is that you saw how easy it was for me to make those changes to unlink the chart from the embedded workbook. Well, I have gone in there and I've made a little function that is called unlink spreadsheet. This unlink spreadsheet, it calls a recursive pure functional transform to make all of those modifications to that markup, and then further it goes in and deletes the embedded workbook from the document. I also have this code to update the series with ChartData. I'm going to comment that out for 1 minute just to show you something. Let's run the example. And now if I go into updated chart 1, I see the chart in there. It's the original chart. The only thing is here I can't right click and tell it I want to edit data because the embedded workbook has been removed from this updated document. Well, last but not least, we can now go in and replace the series for any particular chart. As I mentioned before, there are 5 child elements of any SER element that are of interest to us. There's the category access data, the IDX, the order element, the TX element, that's the name of the series, and these val elements. What I've done is I have made a little class called ChartData. This class is very simple. It has an array of strings for the series names. It has an array of strings for the category names, and it has a 2-dimensional array of values that are going to become the new data for the chart. And I showed you this code before. This is the very simple code to initialize that chart data element. We can initialize the series names, we can initialize the category names, and we can initialize the values, and then we can call this method update chart, passing an open word processing document, passing the name of the content control that contains that chart, and then passing the chart data that we just created right here. This update chart, it goes into the word processing ML, finds the content control with the specific tag. It then gets the chart part and then calls this method update chart, passing the chart part. As an aside, after it gets done updating the chart, it removes the content control. We probably don't want that content control to be in the final updated document. So if we look at the update chart method, first thing that it does is it just validates that the array of values, the bidirectional array of values, has the same number of rows as series, and it has the same number of columns as there are categories. We just want to make sure that we have the right shape of data to update our chart. It calls the method unlink spreadsheet, so this will make it far easier for us to update the data in that chart. And then it calls this method update series. Let's look at this method update series. So this method update series, first thing it does is it removes all but the first of the series, and then it creates a new set of series out of that data that is passed, this chart data that is passed into the method. And one thing that you'll notice here is when it creates this new set of series, it pulls in any necessary auxiliary elements from the series that was in the document. So it takes this first series that we found up here and it goes and grabs all of the extra elements and attributes so that we're creating a new set of series that has new data, has new categories, has new values, but it has all the same other stuff that is needed for that particular chart type. For those of you who have gone through, for instance, the recursive pure functional transform screencast series, this code will be very straightforward to read, although you may actually not really need to read it. If this code just does what you want it to do, then you don't need to necessarily understand everything about this code. And after creating the new series, it replaces that first series with the new set of series and puts the X document back into the chart part. It's got one other detail, which is it updates the accents in the document. So if, for instance, Series 1 used accent 1 and Series 2 used accent 2, we want to have that be in the new set of series that we're putting into this document. So now we can go look at how this code worked. Here is the chart as I inserted it earlier in the screencast. And here's the chart as it looks like after I updated the data with our van, truck, and car data and Q1 through Q4. Here is another chart. This is as inserted. It's a line chart. And if I look at it here, we can see that that same chart has its data updated: car, truck, and van, and Q1 through Q4. Chart number 3 is a bar chart. Here's the updated version. Chart number 4 is a sideways bar chart or a column chart. And here is the same chart updated with our data. Chart number 5, 3D chart with this table down below. And here is our updated version. Chart number 6 is a pie chart. One of the things about pie charts is they're only allowed to have one series. So if I go look at the sample code for the pie chart, we see that there's only one series. It has a dummy name series. It has categories of cars, trucks, vans, and boats, and it has 4 numbers. When we look at the updated document, we can see the pie chart as we expected to see it. Chart number 7 is a surface chart. And what I did for the surface chart is I put together this array of values to kind of describe a surface. And when we look at the updated chart 7, there we can see a very nicely put together surface chart that shows something, shows some, in my case, random data. But if you were generating this data from other real-world source, then you could get a very nice surface chart out of this. And chart number 8, interesting thing about this one, this is a line chart, but it has these dates down at the bottom. When we look at the updated version, we can see the dates down at the bottom. And if you're familiar with SpreadsheetML, you know that dates are represented as integers, where January 1st, 1900 is date 1, January 2nd, 1900 is date 2, and so on. So there's a little bit of extra work that we have to do here, where we have to call this method toExcelInteger. We pass in the date time that is initialized to the date that we're interested in. Here are the values. And if we look at that method toExcelInteger, here is the expression that takes the date time, subtracts the date time of January 1st, 1900, gets the total days, and converts that to an integer and puts it into the data for the category names. And then we have our various values there. And when we update that chart, we can see it looks like this. So I've supplied the example code for you so that you can insert categories that are dates. And so then your resulting updated chart will look like you want it to look. One last point is I also made an overload of update chart that takes a open presentation, and you pass in a slide number, and then you pass in the data. And that does basically the same thing, just a little bit of different plumbing to get to the chart part. And if we look at the presentation with the chart as inserted, this is the chart that's in slide 1, and here is the updated chart in slide 1. Well, that's all I'm going to cover in this video. What we've seen is that, first of all, if you simplify the chart markup so that it doesn't refer to an embedded workbook and worksheet, then the chart is much easier to update. We can just update the series in the markup for the chart. Second of all is by understanding that all the series have the same common set of 5 values that we need to update. So long as we take the series that's in an existing chart and update those 5 values but leave everything else intact, we can update just about any type of chart with our own data. In future screencasts, I am going to do a deep dive into DrawingML and into the chart markup. I'm also going to add another example that shows how to update the embedded workbook so that you can update the chart and in fact make it editable by your end users. That's all I'm going to cover. Thanks for watching. See you next time.